The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on Jacob Wheeler's weathered face as he surveyed the cracked earth that once held his dreams. Dust devils danced across the barren pasture where his cattle should have been grazing, their skeletal forms now reduced to mere memories buried beneath the unforgiving soil. The summer of 1887 had been the worst drought in living memory, and Jacob's small ranch bore the scars of nature's wrath. "Damn it all," he muttered, removing his worn hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. At 42, Jacob had spent the better part of 2 decades building this place from nothing, and now it seemed destined to return to that same state. The bank notice crumpled in his back pocket felt heavier than the tools he carried. 3 months behind on payments, with winter approaching and no cattle to sell. His wife Martha had passed 2 years prior, taking with her not just his heart, but also her steady hands that had helped keep the books balanced and the household running. "Jacob!" The voice of his neighbor, Tom Hendricks, cut through the afternoon heat. Tom approached on horseback, his own face bearing the same weathered desperation that marked all the ranchers in the valley. "You seen anything strange on your property lately?" "Strange how?" Jacob asked, though he had a sinking feeling about what Tom might be referring to. "Indians," Tom said, lowering his voice as if the very word might summon trouble. "Sheriff says there's been movement through the area. Some of the tribes are getting restless with the reservation conditions." Jacob nodded grimly. The tensions between the white settlers and the native tribes had been simmering for years, occasionally boiling over into violence that left everyone worse off. The drought had made things harder for everyone, including the indigenous people who had been pushed onto increasingly smaller parcels of land. "I'll keep my eyes open," Jacob replied, though he wondered what good it would do. He barely had the strength to maintain his own property, let alone patrol it for unwanted visitors. As Tom rode away, Jacob returned to his work, attempting to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by the wind. The monotonous task gave him time to think, though his thoughts weren't particularly comforting. He had options, none of them good. He could sell the land to the railroad company that had been circling like vultures, though the offer was insultingly low. He could abandon everything and head east, starting over in some factory town where the air was thick with smoke instead of dust. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Jacob heard something that made him pause. It was a sound that didn't belong to the empty landscape, a low moan, barely audible above the wind. He set down his tools and listened carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that leaned against the fence post. The sound came again, and this time Jacob was certain it wasn't an animal. Someone was in distress, and they were close. Following the sound, he made his way toward a cluster of rocks near the dry creek bed that ran along the eastern border of his property. What he found there challenged everything he thought he knew about his situation. A young Native American man, probably no more than 20, lay semi-conscious among the rocks. His breathing was labored, and even from a distance, Jacob could see the flush of fever on his dark skin. The man's clothes were torn and dust-covered, suggesting he had been traveling for some time. Jacob's first instinct was to back away, to pretend he had seen nothing. Getting involved with an Indian, especially one who might be fleeing from somewhere, could bring more trouble than he could handle. But as he watched the young man struggle to breathe, another instinct took over. Same one that had compelled him to pull injured cattle from creek beds and nurse sick animals back to health. "Son of a bitch," Jacob whispered to himself, knowing he was about to make a decision that could change everything. He approached carefully, speaking in a calm voice despite his racing heart. "Easy there, friend. I'm not going to hurt you." The young man's eyes fluttered open, dark and bright with fever. He tried to speak, but only managed a few words in his native language that Jacob couldn't understand. "You're burning up," Jacob said, reaching out to feel the man's forehead. The heat radiating from his skin was alarming. I'm going to help you, but I need to get you somewhere safe first." Jacob's back ached as he helped the fevered young man into his cabin, the effort taking nearly all of his remaining strength. The native was delirious, muttering words in a language Jacob didn't recognize while his body trembled with chills, despite the burning heat of his skin. Jacob had seen enough sick animals to know that this fever was dangerous, the kind that could kill if left untreated. "Easy now," Jacob said, settling the man onto his own bed, the only proper sleeping place in the small cabin. "You're safe." "Here." The young man's eyes opened briefly, focusing on Jacob with surprising clarity. "Why?" he whispered in heavily accented English. "Because it's the right thing to do," Jacob replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed his own words. The right thing to do might have been to contact the authorities, or at least to stay out of tribal affairs entirely. But looking at this sick young man, Jacob saw not a threat, but a human being in need. He spent the next several hours doing what he could with his limited medical knowledge. He bathed the man's forehead with cool water from his well, the same water he had been rationing for his own use. He forced small amounts of water between the cracked lips, trying to prevent dehydration. When the young man became restless, Jacob spoke to him in soothing tones, the way he had once spoken to his cattle during difficult births. "My name's Jacob," he said during one of the man's more lucid moments. "Jacob Wheeler. What's yours?" "Ayana," came the weak reply. "Ayana Crowfeather." "Well, Ayana, you picked a hell of a time to get sick," Jacob said with a slight smile. "But we'll get you through this." As the night wore on, Ayana's condition seemed to worsen. His breathing became more labored and his fever spiked higher. Jacob found himself at a loss, having exhausted his limited knowledge of treating illness. In desperation, he remembered something his grandmother had done when he was a child and sick with pneumonia. She had sung to him old songs that seemed to calm not just his mind, but his very soul. "I don't know if this will help," Jacob said, feeling somewhat foolish, "but my grandmother always said music could heal what medicine couldn't touch." He began with a simple hymn, one his mother had taught him years ago. His voice was rough from disuse and the dry air, but he persisted. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. To his surprise, Ayana's breathing seemed to steady slightly. Encouraged, Jacob continued with other songs from his childhood lullabies his mother had sung, work songs he had learned from other ranchers, even a few folk ballads he had picked up in saloons during his younger days. "I was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see," Jacob sang, his voice growing stronger with each verse. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man who felt more lost than ever, singing about being found while caring for someone who might be considered his enemy by others in the territory. As the hours passed, Jacob noticed that Ayana seemed to respond to certain songs more than others. The slow, mournful ballads appeared to calm him most, while the more energetic tunes seemed to agitate him. Jacob adjusted his repertoire accordingly, focusing on the gentle melodies that seemed to bring some measure of peace to the fevered young man. "I don't know what trouble you're running from," Jacob said quietly during a pause between songs, "but I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for on the other side of it." Ayana's eyes opened again, and this time they held a different quality, not just the bright glaze of fever, but something deeper. "My sister," he whispered, "she is was taken." Jacob felt his heart sink. He had heard stories of women being taken during raids, both white women taken by Indians and Indian women taken by whites. The cycle of violence and retribution seemed endless, each side convinced of their righteousness while innocents suffered. "I'm sorry," Jacob said, meaning it. "I truly am. The fever it came after After I searched for many days," Ayana continued, his voice barely audible. "The medicine man, he said it was the weight of grief making me sick." Jacob nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. His own grief after Martha's death had manifested in different ways: the inability to sleep, the loss of appetite, the way simple tasks became overwhelming burdens. Grief was indeed a sickness, one that could consume a person from the inside out. "Then we'll sing it out of you," Jacob said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "We'll sing until that grief loosens its hold." He began another song, one his father had taught him about a man who had lost everything but found hope in the simple act of moving forward. As he sang, Jacob realized that the words weren't just for Ayanna, they were for himself as well. Reminder that sometimes the only way through darkness was to keep singing until dawn. The first pale light of dawn was creeping through the cabin's single window when Jacob finally allowed himself to rest. Ayanna's fever had broken sometime during the night, and he now slept peacefully, his breathing deep and regular. Jacob sat in his single chair, watching the steady rise and fall of the young man's chest, when he heard the sound that made his blood run cold. Horses, multiple horses, moving slowly and deliberately toward his cabin. Jacob moved to the window and peered out carefully. What he saw made his heart pound against his ribs. 5 Native American men sat mounted outside his cabin, their horses arranged in a semicircle facing his door. They were older men, their faces marked by years of wisdom and hardship, their bearing suggesting they were men of importance within their tribe. Their eyes were fixed on his cabin with an intensity that spoke of both patience and purpose. "Elders," Jacob whispered to himself, recognizing the gravity of the situation. These weren't raiders or young warriors looking for trouble. These were the decision-makers, the ones who would determine whether his act of kindness would be rewarded or punished. Behind him, Ayanna stirred on the bed. "They have come," he said weakly, his voice clearer than it had been all night. "Who are they?" Jacob asked, though he suspected he already knew. "My grandfather, Tall Bear, and the council elders of our band," Ayanna replied, struggling to sit up. "They have been searching for me." Jacob felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. If these were Ayanna's own people, then perhaps his situation wasn't as dire as he had feared. But the formal way they sat waiting suggested this was more than a simple family reunion. "What do they want?" Jacob asked. "To understand why a white man would risk everything to save one of us," Ayanna said, managing to swing his legs over the side of the bed, "and to determine what must be done about it." Jacob helped Ayanna to his feet, though the young man was still weak from his ordeal. "What do you mean, what must be done?" "In our tradition, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that life," Ayanna explained. "But you are not of our people. This creates complications." Jacob's mind raced. He had acted out of simple human decency, not considering the cultural implications of his actions. Now it seemed he had unknowingly entered into something much larger than himself. "I need to speak with them," Jacob said, moving toward the door. "Wait," Ayanna said, grasping Jacob's arm. "There is something you must know. My sister ... she was not taken by your people. She chose to leave with a white man, a traitor who promised her a better life. I have been searching for her to bring her home, but the shame of it has been eating at me." Jacob understood. In Ayanna's culture, as in his own, a woman's choice to leave her family for love was often seen as a betrayal, especially if it crossed racial lines. The young man had been carrying not just the burden of searching for his sister, but the weight of his community's judgment. "That doesn't change what I did," Jacob said firmly. "And it doesn't change what I do again." Jacob opened the door and stepped outside, his hands visible and empty. The 5 elders regarded him with expressions that revealed nothing. The eldest, whom Jacob assumed was Tall Bear, spoke in a voice that carried the authority of years. "You are Jacob Wheeler," he said in careful English. "I am," Jacob replied. "You took our grandson into your home. You sang to him through his fever. You asked for nothing in return. He was sick. I helped him," Jacob said simply. Tall Bear nodded slowly. In our way, this creates a bond. But you are not of our people, and these are difficult times between our peoples. I know that, Jacob said. But I couldn't just leave him there to die. Why? Another elder asked. Your people have shown little concern for ours. Jacob considered the question carefully. Because I've lost enough already. I couldn't bear to lose my humanity too. The elders exchanged glances, and Jacob caught the slight nod that passed between them. Tall Bear dismounted and approached. Jacob, his weathered face serious but not unkind. Ayanna has told us of your songs, of how you cared for him as you would your own son, Tall Bear said. This is not a small thing. I only did what anyone should do, Jacob replied. But few would have done it, Tall Bear observed. The drought has been hard on your people as well as ours. Yet you shared your water, your food, your shelter. Jacob nodded, not sure what response was expected. We have a proposal, Tall Bear continued. Your land borders the winter grounds our people have used for generations. The government would not allow us to use them, but you could lease them to us. In return, we would help you rebuild your herd, share our knowledge of finding water in dry times. Jacob's eyes widened. It was an offer that could save his ranch, but it would also make him a target for other white settlers who might see him. As a trader, there would be risks, Jacob said. There are always risks in doing what is right, Tall Bear replied. But some risks are worth taking. Jacob looked at Ayanna, who had managed to make his way to the doorway. The young man nodded. Slightly, a gesture of encouragement and trust. I accept, Jacob said, extending his hand to Tall Bear. As they shook hands, Jacob realized that his night of singing had done more than just heal Ayanna's fever. It had bridged a gap between two worlds, creating possibilities that neither side had imagined possible. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the land that would soon be shared between peoples who had been strangers, brought together by one man's simple act of compassion and the ancient power of song. To heal what seems beyond healing.